And welcome in to another edition of Quarantine Q&A presented by Alabama One Credit Union. You know, they've been voted Tuscaloosa's best credit union and best mortgage lender. Alabama One offers low-rate auto, mortgage, and business loans, plus protection for it all with Alabama One Insurance. You can visit any of their 9 local branches or check them out online at alabama1.org. Alabama One, proud supporter of Crimson Tide Athletics. Welcome back, everyone, to the Crimson Tide Sports Network. This is Roger Hoover, and we are hoping at this time of the year to be in Hoover, Alabama, talking about the SEC, or actually Atlanta, I guess, this year for the SEC Media Days. And we were hoping to catch up with this man on the other side of the screen, Ryan McGee of ESPN. Ryan, how's everything going, man?
It's good, and I want Alabama people to know that I blurred my background so that they don't have to look at all my Tennessee stuff, because I don't want them to automatically log off. But I wore my Montgomery Biscuits shirt and I got my Trash Pandas hat on, so I'm representing Yellowhammer State, I think.
Yeah, I guess you heard what happened with Cole Cuba. Like, he wore his Auburn shirt right on this Q&A a couple last week.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you know, I got plenty of Tennessee stuff we can pull out, but I feel like I'm going to keep that to ourselves right now.
Oh, that's certainly good to hear. And yeah, hopefully we would have been having this conversation at Media Days. And that's always an exciting time of the year to just know that we're into the talking season. It's almost football time, but really weird on July 14th to have everything kind of still on hold, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's, all of the rhythm of all of our lives have been altered. You know, I should have been in Omaha, Nebraska a couple weeks ago. You know, I should have been at the Indy 500 Memorial Day. I should have been in Destin for the SEC meetings. I should be in Atlanta right now with Marty Smith asking coaches stupid questions. I mean, it's the rhythm of your life that's been disrupted. But in the end, as long as I think if there's any football played at all in 2020, then I think it will completely erase the confusion and pain of right now.
Certainly would. And of course, Greg Sankey was on your radio program, Marty Mcgee, on Saturday to talk about just kind of where the SEC stood at this moment. And his comments really turned out to be pretty newsworthy. Were you expecting that?
No. I mean, listen, if you know anything about Greg Sankey, then you know he doesn't say anything unless it's worth saying. And if you know Greg Sankey, then you know that due diligence is not a strong enough phrase. And when he talked to us on Marty Mcgee on ESPN Radio Saturday morning, he was very frank, and everything that he said was backed up, not surprisingly, by data and by information and by the fact that, I mean, listen, you know, I cover NASCAR, and just, you know, this week, middle of the week in prime time, they're going to run the NASCAR All-Star race at Bristol Motor Speedway with 30,000 tickets for sale. You know, just up the road from you in Talladega, they had 5,000 tickets for sale. So he's studying those things and how baseball is going, how the NBA is going, how Major League Soccer is going, how NFL's plans are going. He's in constant communication, constantly collecting data, as all of the Power Five, really all the conference commissioners and athletic administrators are. And so, yeah, I was a little taken aback just by what he said. But as usual for Greg Sankey, he backed everything he said with data, with information, and with a lot of reasoning. And the fact that they're not going to make a decision until the end of July tells you that they're processing all of that data all the time.
Yeah, and you got to like that he is taking a look at all the data and delaying the decision. I think some people thought maybe with all the athletic directors meeting yesterday in Birmingham, we would get some news out of that. And we really, it seemed like, got the news that we're going to continue talking. And again, we don't have to make any decisions now. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, and listen, Greg Sankey said it to us on Saturday morning, where he had talked to a professor at the University of South Carolina. He's talked to professors and doctors at all of the member institutions of the SEC, but this particular specialist in communicable diseases told Greg Sankey, no matter what you do, take as much time as you possibly can to make any decisions. And so, you know, with that in mind, with what she said, he took that to heart, and that's why I think the SEC and the ACC, and it looks like the Big 12 as well, aren't going to say anything until we get to the end of July, because they're going to push it as far as they can, because the information changes and the data changes, and hopefully it changes for the better between now and then.
A lot of people looked at what happened in March with all the basketball tournaments being shut down kind of at once, and obviously the NCAA tournament was canceled, the spring sports canceled as well, and thought that all the Power 5 ADs would really work in concert on big decisions like this. And with the Big Ten being the first to announce that they were going to conference-only football games, Pac-12 following behind, were you a little surprised by that?
Yeah, and I wasn't as surprised as Greg Sankey was, and I think as John Swofford was at the ACC or Bob Bowlesby at the Big 12. All the conference commissioners are in constant communication, just as all the athletic directors and all the coaches. Everyone's talking all the time, just like we're all talking all the time. Those of us who don't even work in the athletic departments. And so it was a little bit of a surprise, particularly because the Power 5 has made all their moves kind of in lockstep. The Pac-12 is a little bit of a mess right now. They have a little bit of a coup on their hands when it comes to Larry Scott, their commissioner. Larry Scott also tested positive for COVID-19, has gone into quarantine. And so the Pac-12 also got their announcement out there after the Big Ten did. But the big thing is, no matter what conference you're looking at, those first two announcements both had if. If we play football, we'll do conference-only play. But I think that what you're seeing in the Sun Belt, and obviously it's no secret, the numbers when it comes to COVID-19 are a little scary, in a lot of the Sun Belt states. I'm sitting here in Charlotte, North Carolina, right on the North Carolina-South Carolina border, and we're constantly looking at the numbers all the time. And but those Sun Belt conferences, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, are also very much, it's a symbiotic relationship, particularly with the ACC and the SEC. And a priority is to try and protect those cross-conference games. Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State. Those are sacred football games. So if there's a chance to protect those in addition to the conference play, then that's what they want to do, and that's why they're waiting until the end of the month.
Of course, we're talking on the Crimson Tide Sports Network, and Alabama football has been impacted by the Pac-12's decision. We will not get to see Alabama against USC to begin the season in Dallas. What do you think the Crimson Tide could do with Week 1, and what do you think maybe they should do?
Well, I don't know if anybody's going to do anything on Week 1. I think that best case scenario at this point is probably starting the year a little later. That's part of what this whole conference-only idea is, with the conferences that have announced it, which is it allows, again, as much time as possible to make decisions and as much time as possible to let this disease do whatever it's going to do and let people do whatever they can do to try to stave that off. So I think part of that idea is you're not playing Week 1 anyway, and you're not playing Week 2, and you're looking toward the end of September, or you're looking toward October. At least I think the administrators I talk to, the coaches I talk to, the commissioners I talk to, the university presidents I talk to, that's kind of where they're leaning, which is to push that deadline as far as possible. So certainly there are solutions, and we all know Mr. Burns smart enough to have already have 15 different scenarios, on Post-it notes all over his office right now. So I'm sure there's a plan in place if that's the case. But the goal right now is to play football at all, let alone Week 1.
And kind of with that in mind and thinking about what Greg Sankey needs to see in the next few weeks, just what are some of the metrics? Is there really any metric you can point to that could help us know that we are going to have football coming up?
Well, I just think it's trying to dampen down the spike, that's happening right now. And, the big concern, and I learned this with NASCAR. NASCAR was really the first of the big sports to come back. This was back in the middle of May. All due respect to the UFC, they're in one location. NASCAR is moving around all over the place. They're moving almost 1,000 people to location every weekend. The logistics of it are much closer to college football than they are to ultimate fighting. So when I talk to the NASCAR people, one of their biggest concerns, ranked right up there with taking care of their own people and pulling off the event and not having fans or whatever, was the strain that they would put on the local healthcare system, or the strain, are they going to be taking tests away from the general public that needs it to test a bunch of race car drivers and pit crew members? And I think that's a concern, going forward, because obviously testing has to be part of this. We've seen it with baseball, with the NBA, with everyone else. And, if you're talking about several hundred tests, every weekend just for one game, where are those tests coming from? And what kind of strain would it put on the local healthcare system? And where is the strain of those local healthcare systems when we get to September and October and November? So, yeah, I think that that's a big part of the metrics that maybe hasn't been reported that often, but it's a huge part of it, which is a concern about just the people in general. And another thing to watch, Roger, is college campuses. You know, I used this example the other day, and Greg Sankey said this on Marty Mcgee, which is we know the athletic department budgets are massive. You know, $150 million, you know, at a lot of the big SEC schools. Well, the general budget for those schools is also in the $6 billion range with 30, 40, 50,000 undergrads. And if you're a university president, concern one is, do I open the dorms? And do I open the campus, or is everything going to be online? And whether we like it or not, student athletes are student athletes. And so if the 100 and some odd guys that are on the football team, they're probably not going to be there if everything else, if the other 40,000 undergrads aren't going to be there either. So it's the most complicated equation you can think of, and it's a constantly moving target.
If there is football this year and whatever you want to call a normal season, with all the variables that are going on, do you still expect some of the power teams that may be back in even February before we even had spring practice, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, do you still, Georgia, you can throw them in there as well, do you still feel like they will be the teams best in shape for a successful season going into this, or are there just too many variables to tell?
I mean, you know, we don't know because, you know, you got Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin over there, you know, in the state of Mississippi, and obviously Tennessee surging, and there's a lot going on out there. But what did we learn last year during the celebration of the 150th anniversary of college football? Going all the way back to the turn of the last century. You know who was really good at football? Alabama and Ohio State and USC. I mean, all the usual suspects, Georgia and Clemson certainly in the second half of that century. So what we've learned is whether there's a world war going on, or there's a depression, or it's on TV, or it's not, or if you're throwing the football, you're running the football, if you're wearing leather helmets, or you're wearing tricked out helmets of today, whether there's 90,000 people in the stands or 90 people in the stands, for the last 150 years, the programs that are good have always been good, no matter what the situation is. So I believe, that's a really broad way of answering your question, I believe the teams that were going to be good are still going to be good. LSU still has a lot of holes to fill, you know, from that national championship team last year. Clemson doesn't have as many. You know, Alabama obviously has to answer some questions, but, you know, I think they're certainly in a position to just reload. So, yeah, I think the good schools, Ohio State is loaded. Georgia is loaded. The good programs were going to be the good programs whether we play 12 games or whether we play 8.
Yeah, that really led into my next question. Just what do you feel like about this Alabama 2020 team?
I like them a lot, and I think that something that the Alabama program hasn't had to have in a decade is a chip on their shoulder. And now they've got a chip on their shoulder. And I think about, it wasn't that long ago when we're saying, you know what, spread offenses and, you know, is football kind of leaving Nick Saban behind? And what did he do? He completely overhauled the look of that offense. That's, you know, all of a sudden all these USC guys are in the building, you know, with their playbooks. And next thing you know, the guy who was fighting the spread and going to NCAA rules committees and trying to come up with reasons to get rid of the spread, suddenly, you know, he's got the best group of wide receivers in the country. You know, so I think that they have a chance to be very good. And I think the fact that they're angry because they feel disrespected because they haven't had the last couple of playoffs that they would like to have had or been in the playoff at all. An angry Alabama team should be very scary to everyone. An extra motivated Nick Saban should be a little scary to everyone.
Well, of course, all these unknowns surrounding college football season. If games do get played, what do you feel like the coverage is going to be like from your network, ESPN? We're so used to College Game Day in front of huge crowds. You've traveled around with SEC Nation as well. Just how do you feel like games are going to be broadcast, and what's the media coverage going to be like around college football this year?
Well, those meetings are taking place right now at ESPN. And again, it's kind of an A scenario, B scenario, C scenario. And I can tell you that I want nothing more than to be back in Tuscaloosa as we were a couple of times last year with SEC Nation. And I like the fact that for the LSU game, we were on one side of the quad and game day was on the other. And Marty and I were trying to lure over those game day people to come see our little set over here on the other side. So I want that to happen more than anything in the world. But, you know, listen, if there's no fans, I guarantee you that we'll take that thing on the road and have a great backdrop. If we don't take it on the road, we have a beautiful studio right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, where as we speak, Paul Feinbaum is probably making people really angry down the hallway from what would be the SEC Nation shed right next to the Wilderness Lodge, the Marty Mcgee set. So it will be there. And I go back to NASCAR. To televise a NASCAR race takes about 3 times the number of cameras and about 3 times the size of a crew that it does to televise a college football game. Your standard, Saturday afternoon top 10 SEC game. So I know it can be done logistically. I've seen what Fox and NBC have done televising these NASCAR events where they're using a control room in Los Angeles and they're using a graphic machine in Charlotte, and Jeff Gordon sitting in his house with a headset on. And so I know there are multiple solutions, and I can tell everyone that it'll look good. I'm not worried about that. A lot of really smart people at ESPN are having those meetings right now. And by the way, our baseball people and our MLS people and our UFC people, they've all been already doing this. So there's a playbook in place. It's just a question of what the details ought to be.
And you guys have kept Marty and McGee going, you and Marty Smith. That's really a fun show each and every Saturday to tune into. And you guys have been friends for how long now? I mean, it's just natural chemistry.
Yeah, 20 years. I mean, we can't remember where we first met, but we know it was probably in like a press box at like the South Boston Speedway covering a NASCAR Truck Series race. We've known each other forever. My claim to fame, or claim to shame, however you want to look at it, is I was the first TV producer to put Marty on television. I used to be a TV producer for Fox Sports Net, and we needed like a NASCAR analyst, like a writer guy, and he was at NASCAR.com at the time. And so, for better or for worse, I'm the first one to put that hillbilly on television, and now we host a show together.
It's a pretty remarkable journey you guys have had, and you guys, again, have a really great show. And speaking of remarkable journeys, we're going to be hearing more about your family coming up. I understand you have a book coming out in September.
I do. My father, for folks that don't know, he was a college football official on the sidelines, a field judge, side judge, back judge for almost 40 years. And he was at the highest level of football for almost 30 years. His last game was the 2009 championship game, BCS championship game with Florida and Oklahoma, and Sam Bradford and Tim Tebow. And so if you ever wondered what the coaches are screaming at the official that stands on the sideline of games, we're going to tell you. And we're going to tell you also about a couple times my dad screamed back. Well, I wish I had the picture in front of me. I have a phenomenal picture of Mike Shula just unloading on my father. And my dad's completely ignored him. He's filling out his penalty card and looking at the scoreboard. But my brother and I, my brother's an attorney here in North Carolina, we had our first sideline passes when we were 11, 12 years old. And so we learned college football and loved college football from the sideline because our dad was an official, was a referee. And so, yeah, September 15th, Sidelines and Bloodlines. And I think people will like it. It's, it's a father and his sons, and we love college football. And we grew up loving it together. I think everybody can relate to that, certainly in Tuscaloosa.
Absolutely. Some really good memories are going to be in that book. And before we let you go, just any final memories you have of either covering Alabama, maybe coming to either Legion Field in Birmingham or Tuscaloosa for a game, any fun experiences you want to share with Crimson Tide fans?
Yeah, I wrote about this last year for the 150th anniversary of college football. I wrote a story about Bear Bryant as Elvis because, Bear Bryant, I would argue, is bigger now than he was when he was alive. He's been gone, since the early 1980s, but I grew up in the Carolinas. I grew up on Tobacco Road. I went to school at Tennessee. A lot of great people went there, right, Roger? And
That's
so
true. I agree.
Yeah, right. And so but my first Tennessee-Alabama game, my first third Saturday in October, the game was still being played at Old Legion Field, and my college roommate and I drove down from Knoxville to Birmingham, parked in some guy's front yard, and I will never forget seeing these people selling these framed, painted portraits of Bear Bryant, like on the street, like in these beautiful oak frames, these hand-painted portraits, and people were buying them up for like $100. And it reminded me of watching people sell Velvet Elvis paintings outside of Graceland in Memphis. And I thought about all these people in Alabama with a framed portrait of Bear Bryant hanging over their mantle as like the centerpiece of their home. And I thought, you know what? This is not ACC football. I've never seen anything like that. And it was, I also got a rock thrown through my windshield because I had a Tennessee sticker in the back window. So it was a good time. It was in a heartbreaking loss for the Volunteers. Saran Stacy went crazy in the second half, And I thought Legion Field was going to collapse in on itself because it was so old and rickety, but it was awesome regardless. And so, yeah, it was a baptism by any measure on the third Saturday of October. But yeah, by the way, I did not buy one of those framed Bear Bryant portraits, but I know there's hundreds of them out there all over Alabama.
Yeah, that's not blurred out behind you or anything like that.
No, there's not. I think I have an autographed picture of Johnny Majors back here, but not Bear Bryant.
There you go. Well, Brian, it's been a lot of fun to catch up and talk some college football again. Greg Sankey made some news on your program on Saturday, talking about he's got a high level of concern right now for what the football season may look like. But we look forward to catching up with you down the road, hopefully talking about some Crimson Tide matchups that are in store. But thank you again. Fingers crossed for college football.
There you go. Everybody cross them up, both hands. Keep them there till September.
All right. Well, thanks to Ryan McGee of ESPN, and thank you for watching the Crimson Tide Sports Network.